She's calling him again. Are you sure that baby is even yours? Before you scroll, listen. Some betrayals don't scream, they whisper. And this one started with a single question at a doctor's office. Stay with me. You won't believe what came next. That was the line the woman beside me whispered, so quietly I almost wondered if my tired mind twisted her words. But the way her eyes darted toward my daughter-in-law told me she meant every syllable. In that instant, the clinic's bright hallway felt colder, as if the temperature dropped just for me. I didn't gasp or jerk my head. I simply blinked once, smoothed the hem of my cardigan and said, "Excuse me," with a calmness that even surprised me. Women my age learn to steady their voices long before they learn to steady their lives. She leaned back in her chair, tucking her purse closer to her side. Her fingers shook slightly as if she regretted speaking. "I'm sorry," she murmured. I thought you should know what I've been seeing." She didn't look at me again. She kept her gaze on the closed examination room door as though something inside it frightened her. I followed her gaze. Through the narrow glass panel I could see my daughter-in-law, Emma, perched on the edge of the patient bed. She wasn't looking at her phone like I expected. No, she was holding it to her chest, smiling softly at someone on the other end. And the person she was talking to. I recognized the tone in her voice. Sweet. A tone she never used with me. Or with my son. I didn't want to assume anything. Women my age know assumptions start wars. But I also knew the sound of affection when I heard it. And what I heard was not the sound a woman makes when she's calling her husband. It was 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, and the clinic was busier than usual. The scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of cinnamon from the small candle warmer the receptionist always kept behind the desk. The lights hummed overhead, bright, fluorescent, the kind that make every flaw more visible. Perhaps that was why the moment felt so sharp, so painfully clear. I pressed my hands together, noticing the slight tremor in my fingers. Not from fear, not exactly. More from recognition. Older women have instincts younger ones ignore. And mine were screaming. So I remained quiet. The woman beside me clearly didn't want to say more. She kept her eyes lowered, adjusting her wedding ring again and again, the metal glinting under the harsh lights. Maybe she had her own story. Maybe she saw something in Emma that reminded her of a hurt she once carried. Or maybe she simply felt compelled to warn me. People do that sometimes, offering truth to strangers because they cannot speak it in their own lives. A nurse in blue scrubs stepped out of the hallway and called another patient. Her shoes squeaked softly against the linoleum floor. I watched the nurse turn toward me briefly as if she recognized my face, then looked away just as fast. That small flicker, a moment of hesitation, made my stomach tighten. It was too quick to decipher but not quick enough to ignore. I tucked that away in my mind. I've learned never to overlook the small things. My daughter-in-law laughed behind the exam door, just a soft breath of amusement, but it echoed down the hall as though the walls wanted me to hear it. My heart squeezed. Not because of jealousy or suspicion, but because I had spent months trying to help her feel supported, seen, cared for. I paid for her vitamins, drove her to appointments, made dinners when she felt sick. I gave her everything a mother-in-law could give. And hearing her laugh like that, so carefree, so gentle, hurt in a way I couldn't name. But I didn't show it. I straightened my posture, lifted my chin, and forced myself to breathe evenly. The more unsettled she seemed later, the more I wanted to look unshakable now. Another small detail caught my attention. The receptionist kept glancing toward me with a softness I'd never seen before. Not pity exactly. More like concern. She fiddled with the stack of intake forms repeatedly, aligning their edges even though they were already perfectly straight. Something about her nervousness made me more alert. I looked away from her and focused on the hallway. The carpet runner leading toward the exam rooms had shifted slightly. One corner was folded under itself. I don't know why that bothered me, but it did. Small disruptions in ordinary places tend to signal larger things beneath the surface. When the examination door finally opened, Emma stepped out, her eyes sparkling a little too brightly. She held her phone at her side quickly as if trying to hide the glowing screen. Her hair was tucked neatly behind her ear, and her hand trembled just slightly when she saw me standing. "Oh, hi," she said, forcing a smile. "You're still waiting?" "I said I would," I replied gently. "I keep my promises." I let those words settle between us, watching the way she swallowed hard. She reached for her purse with a hurried movement. Your husband asked if you could handle the payment for today, she added, avoiding my eyes. He's in a meeting and said you'd understand. My husband. Not the doctor. Not your son-in-law. My husband. I felt the smallest twitch at the corner of my mouth, but I didn't let it show as anything more. Of course, I answered softly. I'll take care of it. Her shoulders relaxed as if she had escaped something. And that, more than anything the stranger whispered, disturbed me. I walked to the counter. The receptionist avoided eye contact for a moment, then placed the invoice in front of me with hands that were far too gentle. Here you go, Mrs. Hayes, she whispered. She only ever called me Mrs. Hayes when something was wrong. I thanked her, paid the bill, and tucked the receipt into my bag. As I turned, I saw the woman who had whispered the warning earlier slip out of the clinic, her shoulders hunched as though she couldn't bear to witness what would come next. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. I stepped toward Emma. The hallway suddenly felt narrower, as if the building itself leaned in to listen. The fluorescent lights above buzzed louder. The distant hum of machinery from the back rooms vibrated faintly through the floor. Every sound felt magnified. Ready to go? I asked. She nodded quickly. Yes. I'm starving. Her voice wavered, not from hunger. From something else. Something she didn't want me to notice. We walked together through the long hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to glance my way. I let her silence hang. Sometimes silence reveals the truth faster than questions ever could. When we stepped outside, the crisp afternoon air hit my face, mixing scents of autumn leaves and distant traffic. The parking lot glistened with the faint sheen of the morning rain that had dried unevenly. A single bird hopped near the curb, pecking at a stray wrapper, completely unaware of the tension walking past it. I paused near my car, placing my hand lightly on the door handle. Emma, I said. She froze. Her hand tightened around her purse strap. Yes, she whispered, her voice thin. I stepped closer, not enough to frighten her, but close enough that she couldn't escape the weight of my presence. I kept my tone steady, not confrontational, just unmistakably aware. That phone call, I said softly. You sounded happy. Her eyes widened, just a flicker but enough. Oh, that was nothing, she rushed out. Just a friend checking in. A friend, I repeated, holding her gaze. The word hung between us like a thread pulled too tight. Her breath hitched. And then, before she could recover, before she could lie again, before she could build another layer of excuses, I leaned in just slightly, enough for my voice to reach only her ears. We'll talk later, I said. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at me, unsure whether I knew everything, or nothing at all. I let that uncertainty sit in her chest like a stone. Then I opened the car door and waited for her to get in, keeping my expression unreadable. If she looked carefully, she might have noticed the thin tab of folded legal paperwork peeking out from my bag, the one advantage I kept quietly, patiently, without explanation. But she didn't see it. Not yet. And that's where this part ends, right there with her frozen beside my car, the wind carrying the last of the clinic's whispers behind us, and the truth edging dangerously close, but not revealed. Emma finally slid into the passenger seat, but her hesitation lingered in the air even after she closed the door. She sat stiffly, adjusting her seatbelt as if she needed something to anchor herself. I started the engine without speaking. The late afternoon sun had softened, leaving long shadows stretching across the parking lot. As we pulled away, her reflection in the window caught my eye, wide-eyed, pale, lips pressed tight. She looked like someone trying very hard not to reveal how frightened she was. I didn't push her. Silence, I've learned, has a way of coaxing truth out of people far more effectively than confrontation. So I let the quiet fill the car while I merged into traffic, the gentle hum of the engine the only sound between us. The windshield still held faint streaks from the morning rain, and each light we passed created a soft blur across the glass. Even that small distortion felt symbolic today, how easily clarity can smear. When we reached home, she moved quickly, almost tripping on the front step as she rushed inside. I followed at my usual pace, hanging my purse on the hook by the door. My house smelled faintly of rosemary, a pot of soup I had left simmering earlier, and the familiar scent eased a small part of my tension. Home at least had not betrayed me. I found Emma in the kitchen pretending to be busy with the kettle. She opened and closed the cupboard twice before she found the tea bags that were always in the same spot. "I could make us something warm," she said, forcing a casual tone that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That would be nice," I replied gently, settling into my usual chair. I watched her hands. They moved too fast, too clumsily, spilling sugar across the counter. She brushed it away quickly, pretending I didn't notice. I did. I noticed everything. As she poured the water, she asked, "Do you want honey in yours?" "Yes, please." My voice stayed light, soft, unbothered. But beneath the table, my fingers traced the small crease in my skirt. A habit I'd picked up decades ago whenever I needed to keep myself composed. When she finally handed me the cup, she sat across from me, clutching hers with both hands. Her nails tapped nervously against the ceramic. "Today was a lot," she murmured, staring into her drink. "It was," I agreed. "But appointments often are." I said it casually, almost kindly, giving her room to explain anything she wished. He didn't. She just nodded, swallowed hard, and looked away. This was my confirmation she was afraid of what I might know. I changed the subject smoothly, asking how she was feeling, if the baby seemed active today, whether she needed anything from the store. The questions were ordinary, caring, familiar. They made her relax just a little. Her shoulders lowered. Her voice steadied. She believed I wasn't suspicious. Exactly what I wanted. After tea, she excused herself to rest. I waited until her footsteps disappeared down the hall before I moved. I opened the drawer next to the fridge and pulled out the small calendar where I'd been tracking her appointments. Today's date now stood out like a bruise. The times didn't align with what she had told my son earlier in the week. And the clinic check-in timestamp on her paperwork, printed right on the sheet she handed me without noticing, showed she'd arrived nearly an hour before she claimed. I stared at the calendar, feeling a quiet ache settle beneath my ribs. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud, impossible to hide. This was something quieter, deeper. A sadness that had weight. A sadness that wanted answers. I slid the calendar away before she could return and headed to the living room. The late afternoon light filtered through the curtains, dust particles drifting lazily in the beams. I sat on the couch, folded my hands in my lap, and reminded myself to breathe. A few minutes later, I heard the faint creak of her bedroom door. Her footsteps approached cautiously. She stood at the edge of the room, pretending she needed something from the shelf. "Your husband said he might be home late again tonight," she said too casually. "Did he call you?" I asked without looking up. She froze. No, he mentioned it earlier. Before the appointment." My gaze lifted to meet hers. There it was again, that quick, trembling flicker of uncertainty. I nodded slowly. "Oh, I see." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the motion shaky. "Do you need anything before I lie down again?" "No, thank you," I said kindly. "Rest while you can." She lingered 1 second too long before turning away. That hesitation, it was another small crack. One of many I would see in the weeks to come. After she disappeared down the hallway, I reached for my phone and opened my messages. My son had texted earlier asking how the appointment went. I typed back, "Everything went smoothly. She's resting now." True enough and harmless. I didn't want to worry him. Not until I had facts, not suspicions. A soft tap sounded at the window. A branch from the maple tree brushed against the glass, swaying in the evening wind. I stared at the shadows stretching across the front lawn, thinking of how easily shadows shift depending on where you stand. And how people do the same thing. The hours passed quietly. During dinner, I asked gentle questions. Nothing probing, just simple conversation. Emma barely ate, claiming nausea. She laughed too quickly at small jokes, dropped her fork twice, and kept checking the time on her phone. "Expecting a call?" I asked lightly. "No," she said, nearly choking on her answer. "Just checking the time. That's all." A lie. A small one, but a lie all the same. Later that night, after she went to bed, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and leftover rain. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle over me. The porch light created a warm pool of brightness around my feet, while the yard beyond lay in shadow. My life felt split the same way, half glowing with the stability I'd built over decades, half sinking into darkness I never expected. I looked toward the lit kitchen window behind me. The edge of a document peeked out from my purse on the table inside. The inheritance draft. The one she signed without reading. I had brought it out earlier to add a note to myself. A small adjustment I needed to discuss with my lawyer. Seeing it now gave me a strange kind of steadiness. Not triumph. Steadiness. It reminded me I wasn't powerless. I wasn't naive. I wasn't blind. I went back inside, quietly closing the door so it wouldn't creak. As I turned toward the hallway, I heard a muffled sound coming from Emma's room. Not crying, not exactly. It was the sound of someone whispering desperately as if trying not to be overheard. I stepped closer but not too close. I didn't want her to know I was listening. Her voice was strained. Urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough to know she wasn't speaking to a friend. And she certainly wasn't speaking to my son. A few seconds later the whispering stopped. The room fell silent. I backed away, returning to the living room before she could step out. My hands shook slightly, not from shock but from confirmation. The cracks were spreading exactly where I expected them to. The next morning she came to the kitchen looking tired, her eyes puffy, her cheeks drained of color. Rough night? I asked gently. She forced a small smile. Just trouble sleeping. I understand, I said, watching her carefully. Let me know if you need anything. She nodded, but she looked away immediately, unable to meet my eyes. That was another answer. As the morning sunlight filled the room, painting the floor with soft gold, I realized something. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to accuse, demand, or cry. All I had to do was keep watching. Keep listening. Keep collecting the truths she thought she was hiding. Because eventually people reveal themselves. Especially when they're hiding something. And with every passing hour, every nervous glance, every poorly constructed excuse, Emma was revealing far more than she realized. I wasn't planning revenge yet. Not fully. Not loudly. But I was preparing something she couldn't feel, couldn't see, couldn't stop. A plan forming quietly beneath her feet. A plan she wouldn't recognize until it was already too late. And as she walked past me that morning, avoiding my eyes once again, I knew the cracks would only grow from here. All I needed to do was wait. Waiting was easier than I expected. The quiet patience I'd carried into motherhood, into marriage, into every part of my long life settled over me again the next morning as I watched Emma walk down the hallway with that same uneasy stiffness in her shoulders. I didn't rush after her. I didn't corner her. I simply observed, silently, steadily, knowing time had already begun revealing what she tried so hard to hide. She left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. That alone was unusual. She never left it behind. Not once. The screen lit up twice with notifications from a messaging app she claimed she barely used. I didn't touch it, didn't need to, but the preview text told me enough. Did you tell her? And call me when you can. My stomach tightened but my face didn't change. I kept stirring the oatmeal on the stove as if I hadn't seen anything at all. By the time she returned, wrapped in a towel with damp hair clinging to her cheeks, I was placing bowls on the table like any other morning. She glanced at her phone instantly, too quickly. The panic that flashed across her eyes when she saw the notifications nearly made her drop it. She looked at me as if trying to decipher whether I'd seen. I gave her the same gentle smile I had offered her for months, the one she always interpreted as kindness instead of clarity. "Breakfast is ready," I said softly. She forced a thank you, her voice thin as paper. While she ate in silence, I paid attention to every detail. Her shaking spoon, the way she pushed the oatmeal around rather than eating it, how she checked the time repeatedly. When she excused herself early, claiming she needed to rest again, I nodded like a motherly figure who accepted every explanation. I watched her walk down the hallway, her footsteps uneven. Only when her door clicked shut did I allow myself a long breath. I moved to the table and pulled the morning mail toward me. A new envelope lay among the bills, addressed to Emma from the clinic. She must have forgotten she requested paper statements. I never opened other people's mail, not once in my entire marriage. But today my hand hovered over the envelope longer than it should have. I reminded myself, patience. Breaking trust would break my plan. So I placed the envelope on her side of the counter and walked away. Instead, I took out the small notebook I'd started keeping discreetly in my purse. Each page held simple notes, times, dates, small inconsistencies she didn't realize she was dropping. I wrote down the new messages she'd received, her reaction when she saw them, the exact time she left the phone unattended. Nothing dramatic. Just details. Women my age know that truth doesn't always come crashing in. Sometimes it arrives slowly, like a tide creeping over the sand. Later in the afternoon I heard her on the phone again, but this time her voice was sharper, more frantic. I sat in the living room pretending to sort old sewing supplies while listening through the thin wall. "She suspects something," Emma whispered. "I don't know. She keeps looking at me." There was a pause. "No, I didn't tell him yet. I can't. Not until I know what she knows." Another pause. Her breathing quickened. "Stop saying that. She's not stupid." I let those words settle in my chest. Not stupid. No, I wasn't. I was observant. Older women often are. We have the benefit of decades spent reading people, watching patterns, understanding silence. When she ended the call, I kept organizing buttons and spools of thread, my hands steady even if my heart wasn't. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt something in between, an ache tinged with clarity. Around 4, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine from the large trees lining the block. Leaves crunched under my shoes. A few children played on the sidewalk, drawing chalk flowers and hopscotch squares. Their laughter lifted something inside me for a moment. Sometimes the world feels unbearably complicated, yet children remind us that innocence still exists somewhere. When I returned, Emma was sitting on the couch scrolling nervously through her phone. The envelope from the clinic sat unopened beside her. She looked up, startled as if caught doing something wrong. I smiled warmly, letting the front door close softly behind me. "You look tired," I told her, hanging my coat. "Everything all right?" "Just a headache," she said quickly. She tucked the envelope under a pillow so hastily I almost laughed. Not at her but at the obviousness of it. "I hope you feel better soon," I replied gently. "Let me know if you want tea." She nodded but kept her distance. That evening after dinner I told her I was going to reorganize some things in the study. She didn't question it. She went to her room early again, claiming exhaustion. The house grew quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like someone holding their breath. I walked into the study and closed the door halfway. My lawyer had emailed earlier confirming our appointment for the next morning. An appointment I'd mentioned before, though she hadn't asked why. I opened my laptop and typed a short reply, confirming I would bring the document Emma had signed. My hands trembled only slightly as I hit send. The study smelled faintly of old books and cedar from the small storage chest against the wall. I opened the drawer where I kept my files and took out the folder containing the inheritance draft. I reviewed it slowly, adjusting the light so it fell directly on the page. The ink looked darker than I remembered. The signature at the bottom, Emma's looping handwriting, seemed almost careless. As I read through it again, I noticed a small oversight in the wording, something my lawyer had already warned me about. It wasn't major, but it could create confusion later. I made a note in the margins to correct it, feeling that quiet steadiness settle over me again. This wasn't revenge yet. This was preparation. Evidence gathering doesn't always involve photographs or recordings. Sometimes the simplest truths lie in paperwork people don't bother reading. A soft knock on the study door startled me. "Can I come in?" Emma asked. I closed the folder and placed it on the desk before turning. "Of course." She stepped inside, arms wrapped around herself. "I just wanted to ask if you needed help with anything." Her tone was gentle, too gentle. Not genuine. It was the voice of a woman trying to gauge how much danger she was in. "No, dear," I said softly. "Everything's under control." Her eyes flicked to the desk, to the folder, then quickly back to me. "Okay," she murmured, stepping back. "Good night." "Good night," I replied. When she left, I exhaled slowly. She was watching me more closely now. She sensed the shift. It wasn't enough to expose anything yet, but it pushed her into a nervous spiral that only deepened the cracks forming in her story. Before going to bed, I walked quietly down the hallway and paused outside her room. Light seeped through the narrow gap beneath the door. I heard faint movement inside. A drawer opening, something being zipped shut, footsteps pacing. She was restless, frightened, and still hiding. The next morning she followed me into the kitchen looking pale and anxious. "Are you going out today?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply, pouring coffee into my cup. Just some errands. She nodded, biting her lip. Do you want company? No, I answered gently. You should rest. She hesitated, then said, if anything comes up, will you tell me? Her voice shook. I looked at her steadily, offering the same calm, unreadable smile she feared more than anger. Of course, I said. You'll be the first to know. But we both knew that wasn't true. She stepped back, her shoulders slumping slightly as if the weight of everything she was hiding pressed down on her bones. As I left the house, I didn't look back at her standing in the doorway. I didn't need to. The worry radiating from her was almost palpable. I had enough observations now to see the pattern clearly. Enough inconsistencies. Enough slips in her behavior. Enough small truths speaking louder than her words. And yet she still didn't know how much I had already gathered. How much I was still gathering. How much I was silently preparing. She would find out soon enough. But not yet. Not today. Today was only about evidence. Quiet, steady, undeniable evidence, collected with a smile she still didn't understand. And as I drove away, her silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger. Not fear. Not triumph. Just certainty. The kind that comes when a woman finally stops doubting what she already knows. That certainty stayed with me as the weeks moved forward, settling deeper into my bones until it felt like part of my pulse. I woke each day knowing something was coming, something I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. I didn't announce it. I didn't lean into it. I just carried it quietly, the way older women often carry truths long before anyone else sees them. And then one cold morning, just as the sun began touching the tops of the trees behind our house, Emma called my name from her room, sharper and more frantic than I'd ever heard. I hurried down the hallway, the hardwood floor cool beneath my feet. She was gripping the edge of her bed, her face pale and twisted in discomfort. It's time, she whispered, breathing hard. I think it's happening. My heart tightened, not with excitement, not with joy, but with an ache so layered I could barely name it. Still, the moment demanded action, not emotion. I helped her into her coat, guided her to the car and told her to breathe slowly. Her hands shook the entire ride. The winter wind rattled the windows and the sky seemed bruised with clouds ready to burst. When we arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed to her side, checking her vitals, adjusting monitors, asking questions she answered with shallow breaths. I stayed near her bed, watching the frantic rhythm of her chest, the panic flickering in her eyes every time someone mentioned contacting family. Should I call your husband? One nurse asked gently. Emma froze for a fraction of a second before nodding. Yes, please, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The nurse stepped out to make the call and Emma turned toward me, forcing a weak smile that didn't mask the fear beneath it. You'll stay with me? She asked. I'm right here, I said quietly. And I was. But not in the way she hoped. The contractions grew stronger. She squeezed my hand, nearly crushing my fingers with each wave of pain. I focused on her breathing, not my own thoughts. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm linens, the beeping monitors pulsing in steady, relentless patterns. Nurses came in and out, adjusting her position, whispering updates, offering soft reassurances. When my son finally arrived, he rushed to her bedside, brushing her hair back gently. His face lit up with hope and fear all at once, and seeing him like that nearly cracked something inside me. He deserved stability. He deserved honesty. Neither of which he was getting today. The doctor entered next. A different one, thank goodness. He greeted us with a warm tone that steadied the tension in the air. He explained that they would move her to a delivery room soon. Emma nodded through clenched teeth. But when he stepped out, Emma looked at me again, her eyes trembling. Do you think everything will be okay? She whispered. Her question held more than the obvious meaning. She wasn't asking about the birth. She was asking about everything she'd been hiding. I met her gaze, letting a long breath fill my lungs before I answered. Life has a way of revealing what we need to know, I said softly. Even when we're not ready. She blinked, startled by my words, but before she could respond, another contraction seized her, bending her forward. Nurses re-entered, guiding her to breathe, preparing her to move. As they transferred her into the delivery room, I stepped aside to allow space. My son followed them closely. A nurse placed a hand on my arm. We'll keep you updated, she said gently. You can wait just outside if you'd like. I nodded, taking a seat in the quiet hallway. The walls here were painted a muted beige and the floor shone with fresh polish. Every sound bounced down the corridor, the squeak of shoes, the distant hum of machinery, the soft chatter of nurses exchanging notes. It was a strangely peaceful corner, tucked away from the intensity of the delivery room. I folded my hands in my lap, smoothing the fabric of my coat, grounding myself in the familiar texture. I reminded myself to breathe slowly. I needed clarity, not trembling. Hidden truth does not reveal itself through panic. It reveals itself through stillness. A few minutes later, the doctor reappeared. "She's progressing quickly," he said kindly. "It shouldn't be long." My son paced the hallway, rubbing his palms together. "She'll be okay, right?" "She's in good hands," the doctor assured him. "These things can move fast." He nodded but didn't completely relax. I watched him, feeling pride and sorrow in equal measure. He was trying so hard to be strong, but he didn't see the storm quietly approaching. He didn't hear the way her secrets rattled the walls of our home. When the nurse called him back into the room, he hurried inside. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone again in the still hallway. I pressed my hands together, letting seconds stretch into minutes. Then through the wall, I heard her cry out, a long, strained sound that rose and fell like a wave. Another nurse rushed past, then another, then a cart of instruments. My heart thudded in my chest. Not from fear of losing her, but from the weight of the moment finally arriving. When the baby's cry echoed through the corridor, it was sharp and immediate. My breath caught. The sound sliced through all the doubt I had held for weeks. It wasn't a sound of clarity or comfort. It was a sound that opened a door, one that couldn't be closed again. A nurse stepped out moments later, smiling warmly. "Healthy baby boy," she announced. "Everyone's doing well." My son's relieved laughter floated through the partially open door. I felt an ache twist through me. He deserved that happiness, even if it wouldn't last the way he imagined. A few minutes later, the nurse approached me again with a clipboard. "Mrs. Hayes, we just need your signature here," she said. "The DNA consent form." Standard procedure with the type of clause I had placed in the paperwork. She didn't question it. She didn't even hesitate. She simply handed me the pen. I signed calmly, the tip gliding smoothly across the page, my fingers steady even as my heart tightened. "Thank you," she said, taking the clipboard back. "We'll process the test shortly." Shortly. Such a small word for something so devastating. I stepped into the delivery room then. My son was holding the baby, his face softened with joy I hadn't seen in years. He looked younger, lighter, almost childlike in his wonder. "Mom," he said, beaming. "Look at him." I approached slowly, taking in the tiny bundle wrapped snugly in hospital blankets. I studied his face, the nose, the eyes, the curve of his jaw. Babies change so quickly. You can't tell much from those first moments. But something inside me shifted, a dull thud of emotion I wasn't ready to name. "He's beautiful," I whispered. Emma watched me carefully from the hospital bed, her expression tight, searching. She looked exhausted, but her eyes still held that guarded fear, the kind that flickers right before truth breaks through the surface. A nurse entered then with fresh blankets, and the moment passed. Hours later, as the excitement softened and the room grew quieter, my son asked if I could hold the baby while they moved Emma to the recovery suite. I nodded, cradling the tiny weight in my arms. He slept soundly, unaware of the complicated world he'd just entered. When the nurse returned with Emma's paperwork, she carried a sealed envelope, one marked for me. "Results came back quickly," she whispered discreetly. "As requested." My throat tightened. She placed the envelope in my hand, warm from her grip. I didn't open it. Not there. Not with my son smiling at me. Not with Emma watching from her bed, her face pale with dread she couldn't hide anymore. Instead, I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket and gave her a calm, measured look that made her flinch. Her voice trembled. Did something come in?" "Yes," I said softly. "Something did." She swallowed hard, her gaze locked on the pocket where the envelope now rested. What does it say?" she whispered. I stepped closer, not unkindly, just firmly, until I stood beside her bed. I lowered my voice so only she could hear. "You'll know," I murmured, "when it's time." Her breath hitched. She turned her face away, but not before I saw the tears beginning to gather in the corners of her eyes. I didn't sit with her. I didn't offer comfort. I simply stepped back, holding the sleeping baby gently, and waited as they prepared to move her. The envelope felt heavier in my pocket with every passing second. The truth had arrived. Quietly. Efficiently. Unmistakably. And as they wheeled her out of the room, her eyes wide with dread, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The collapse had already begun. But it wasn't loud. It didn't explode through the hospital walls or come crashing in with shouts. It unfolded quietly, slow, deliberate, inevitable, just like every truth that has waited too long to surface. I felt it as I stood there holding the sleeping baby, the envelope still heavy in my coat pocket, its edges pressing into my side like a reminder that the moment I had prepared for was no longer approaching. It was here. They wheeled Emma toward the recovery suite, her eyes fixed on me the entire time. Not on the baby. Not on my son. Only on me. Fear has a way of sharpening a person's focus, and she was reading my face as if her entire future depended on it. In some ways it did. My son walked beside her, though he looked back at me twice. First with confusion, then with something close to concern. He sensed the tension but didn't yet understand what it meant. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't feel the envelope burning through my coat like a brand. I followed them slowly, pacing myself, letting the moment stretch so that every footstep echoed with quiet clarity. When we reached the recovery room, the nurse settled Emma into the bed, adjusted the monitors, and handed my son a stack of forms to review. He skimmed them quickly, nodding at whatever explanations the nurse offered. I stayed by the window, rocking the baby gently, watching the winter light fade into a soft gray haze outside. When the nurse finally left, closing the door behind her, the room fell into a tense, trembling silence. Emma swallowed hard. "Is there anything you need to tell us?" she whispered. My son turned to her, puzzled. "What does she mean?" he asked, looking back at me. I didn't answer immediately. I took a moment to adjust the baby's blanket, smoothing the soft fabric across his tiny chest. He sighed in his sleep, his breath warm against my hand. He was innocent in all of this. A life at its beginning should never carry the weight of someone else's choices. When I finally lifted my gaze, both of them were watching me, my son with confusion, Emma with dread so thick it nearly filled the room. I placed the baby gently in the bassinet beside the bed. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope. My son frowned. "What's that?" "The truth," I said softly. I handed him the envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it, unfolding the paper inside. His eyes scanned the lines quickly, then slowed, then stopped altogether. His breath hitched. His face drained of color. He looked up at Emma, stunned. This can't be right." She burst into tears instantly, loud, desperate sobs that broke the fragile stillness of the room. I can explain," she choked out, reaching for him. He stepped back, holding the paper as though it were something sharp. "Explain what?" "That the baby isn't mine." Her sobs grew louder. She reached for his sleeve, but he pulled away as if burned. I didn't speak. I didn't comfort. I simply watched the truth settle between them like dust finally falling after a storm. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No. We were trying for months. You told me." "I know," she cried. "I know, but You lied to me," he whispered. "You lied to both of us." His voice cracked on that last word. "Both." He looked at me then, his expression breaking, and my heart cracked too. I didn't want to see him hurt. I didn't want this pain for him. But pain was the price of deception, and none of us could avoid it now. He turned away, pressing his hand to his forehead. "I can't do this," he murmured. "Not right now." Emma sobbed harder. Please don't leave me." He didn't answer. He opened the door and walked out slowly as though every step weighed him down. The hallway swallowed him in seconds. Left in the room with her, I felt the tension shift. She wiped her face with trembling hands, trying to gather herself, trying to salvage something that was already beyond repair. She looked at me then, her eyes red, her voice shaking. "Why did you do this?" she whispered. "Why couldn't you just let it be?" "Let what be?" I asked softly. "A lie. Betrayal. A life built on deception." She shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't want to lose everything." "Then you should have told him the truth," I said. She stared at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. You wanted this. You wanted me to fall apart. You were waiting for it. No, I said calmly. I was waiting for honesty. She slumped back against the pillows, her breath ragged. I knew you suspected, she whispered. I saw it in your eyes every day. I tried to hide it, but you kept watching me. Yes, I said, I did. Her voice dropped to a faint whisper. And now, I said gently, you face the consequences you created. She closed her eyes, breaking into quiet sobs again. When my son finally returned hours later, his face was pale and his eyes were swollen, but his voice was steady. I'm filing for separation, he said simply. I'll take care of the baby while the hospital sorts out paperwork. But I can't stay with her. Emma collapsed into another wave of tears, calling his name, but he didn't look back. Not once. He picked up his things, held the bassinet gently, and nodded at me. Mom, could you come with me? Of course, I said. We walked out together. The hallway lights glowed softly above us, reflecting off the polished floor. Nurses passed by with quiet smiles, unaware of the fracture that had just formed in that recovery room. The baby slept soundly in the carrier against my son's chest. When we reached the car, he paused beside the door, his shoulders trembling. I placed my hand on his arm. I'm here, I whispered. Whatever comes next, you're not alone. He nodded, tears returning. How did you stay so calm? He asked. Because I knew the truth would never stay hidden, I said. And because peace comes when we stop pretending not to see what's in front of us. He exhaled shakily. I wish I had known sooner. You know now, I said gently. That's enough. The drive home was quiet. Snow had begun to fall lightly, the flakes drifting through the streetlights like tiny glowing feathers. The world looked softer than it felt. When we reached the house, I helped him settle the baby in the guest room, the room I'd prepared weeks earlier without fully understanding why. Maybe my body knew what my heart was afraid to accept. My son sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sleeping infant. What happens now? He asked. You rebuild, I said. Slowly, patiently, and with honesty this time. He nodded weakly, wiping his eyes. Thank you, Mom. For everything. I did what any mother would do, I said softly. I protected my family. Later that night, after he finally slept, I stepped onto the porch. The snow had begun to settle across the lawn, untouched, clean, peaceful. The cold air filled my lungs, crisp and quiet. The house behind me felt different, lighter somehow. Not because there was no pain, but because the truth had finally taken its rightful place. Secrets weigh more than anyone admits. I closed my eyes and let the cold wind brush against my cheeks. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free. And as I turned to go back inside, I whispered the final truth I hadn't spoken aloud until now. Peace isn't given. It's earned. And that was the end of it. If this story shook you, imagine the ones still left to tell. Subscribe for more dark, emotional stories where every betrayal finds its reckoning.